Chapter 8. Skoll to King Thorstein. Sigurd and Freya relished the sharp wind and salt water splashes as they stood at the bow of the ship, the Otter. However, the churning seas grew to mammoth proportions, and they were soon forced to seek shelter in the cabin. Except for those on watch, the rest of the crew stayed below deck. Sigurd trusted in the vessel's sturdiness and the capable command of Ulf to see them through the tempest. "How strange it all seems," Freyja mused later. "Just weeks ago, we had all gathered for my uncle's airship feast. Now the Jomsborg order is crumbling, Vidar is far away in Norway, and we're being tossed about at sea. I wonder what happened to your falcon." Sigurd grinned. "Who can say? But don't worry, we'll soon be back with Queen Gunhild. Hey, Ulf, what's the news?" Ulf arrived, soaked from head to toe, and gave a grim report. "Not too good, Sigurd. This is the fiercest storm I've ever seen. I shouldn't have sailed this time of year, but we must trust in God and weather through it." For 5 endless days the Otter careened before the raging gale, everyone on board preoccupied with the exhausting labor of bailing the ship, which was repeatedly drenched by towering waves. If not for the 18 Vikings who travelled with Sigurd, it's doubtful they would have made it this far. They all worked mechanically, their every moment consumed by the fierce elements until they were physically shattered. On the 5th evening, Sigurd was conversing with Freya in the cabin when a deafening crash and screams startled them. Rushing outside, they saw that the mast was gone, its jagged remains jutting into the sky. Ulf shouted, "The mast! Sigurd, I've done what I could. If the mast had held, we'd have been all right, for the storm is dying, but an hour ago I saw land in the west. We can't sail away from it now." Freya turned to Ulf, a look of despair etched on her face. "Do we even know where we are?" she asked. Ulf shook his head, uncertain. "It could be Scotland, the Orkneys, the Faeries, or even Vinland. We're lost, and it's in the hands of God now." Despite their uncertainty, they persevered, managing to rig enough canvas to the damaged mast to keep the Otter on course throughout the night. As the morning broke, a long line of cliffs loomed ahead. On the forecastle, Freya grabbed Sigurd's arm urgently. "Why don't we escape in those boats?" she yelled over the howling wind, pointing towards the small boats lashed in the stern. Sigurd and Ulf had not even considered this option, the Viking ships usually being small enough to be drawn ashore without the need for a boat. "You're right, Freya!" Sigurd exclaimed, rushing to Ulf. But Ulf shrugged off the suggestion. "What's the point? We'll only prolong the inevitable. The moment we hit those cliffs, it's all over." However, Sigurd was not dissuaded. They readied the boats, loading them with provisions and weapons to ensure their survival. "We need to leave before the ship strikes," Ulf shouted. "Otherwise, the waves will take us all down." Sigurd nodded and led Freya down to the gathering crowd around the boats. With the cliffs now in sight, Ulf motioned for everyone to board. Sigurd took charge of one boat, with Ulf and Bjorn of Bretskard commanding the other 2. With a sharp command, Ulf ordered them to launch the boats into the water, and they were soon paddling frantically, the waves threatening to overturn the vessels. Despite the treacherous conditions, the small boats persevered, finally docking safely on the nearby shore. As they dragged themselves onto land, they were relieved to find they had arrived on the coast of Greenland. "Goodbye, old Otter," Ulf called out as he was the last to leave, and just as they were pulling away, they witnessed the ship lurching and reeling wildly. "We barely made it in time," Sigurd said to Freya, who was in his boat. "She hit the rocks but luckily scraped over this time. Next time, however." As he spoke, the ship leaned over to one side, sending a flurry of foam into the air. But they couldn't dwell on it, as they were now focused on battling the rough waters. Sigurd steered while the men rowed, and the waves carried them toward the cliffs. Suddenly, Ulf raised his hand and waved it, indicating where they should head. Sigurd followed closely behind Ulf's boat, and as they approached the shore, he saw a small stretch of beach before them. With one final push, the men guided the boats onto the sand and jumped out to drag them up onto dry land. Sigurd helped Freya out and looked around. The cliffs didn't seem as steep now, and he realized they could climb them. Ulf joined him soon after, and the captain was feeling more optimistic. "Lady, your plan saved us," Ulf exclaimed to Freya. "I had given up hope. Strange that I never thought of using small boats myself, but we rarely use them. Now, Fairhair, what should we do?" Sigurd gazed out at the wreckage of the Otter being pummeled by the waves. "I suggest we unload the arms and food from the boats, climb the cliffs and see where we are. We have over 20 well-armed men, and I doubt anyone will dare to attack us." Ulf nodded and gave the necessary orders. The group, led by Sigurd, Bjorn, and the other men, made for the cliffs. As Sigurd anticipated, they didn't present much of a challenge for the Norsemen, who were used to climbing the fjords back home. In just 30 minutes, they stood atop the cliff, surveying their surroundings. The landscape before them was filled with thick woods, rolling hills and valleys, but no sign of any human settlement. The storm had subsided, and the sun began to break through the looming clouds. In the distance, they spied a glistening river. A cry of delight rose from the men as Ulf pointed to the river and suggested they head there for fresh water and a meal before deciding on their next move. They left the sea and entered a forest. The autumn season had stripped the trees of their leaves, but the forest was alive with fresh and green pines. Bjorn, perplexed by the new land, voiced his thoughts. "I don't think it's Scotland, fairies, Orkneys or Wales. It could be Ireland, but I've never been there." Freya interjected, "Isn't Ireland where men say Thorstein Tryggvason is king?" Sigurd replied, "Indeed, but it's vast, and we can't be sure of finding any Northmen there." Ulf countered, "Well, let's forge ahead boldly. If we are in Ireland, we're lucky as they say it hosts the finest civilization in Europe." "There used to be," old Bjorn interrupted with a growl. "Just like in Wales, my homeland, but the pagan Vikings have nearly ruined it all." Their journey led them to the banks of a broad and sluggish river. They rushed down to the shore, drinking greedily and washing the salt from their skin. Sigurd poured Freya a horn of fresh water, but they didn't have long to enjoy it. Suddenly, when Bjorn's cry pierced the peaceful moment, "Back! Back! Draw your swords, men!" A rain of arrows fell upon them, felling 2 sailors, and a wild roar came from the trees. The Vikings sprang into action, climbing up the bank and forming a defense line around their leaders while the others took their positions. Amidst the dense trees, dark figures flitted about. Sigurd commanded, "Form a shield wall, men! Keep your spears at the ready!" The Vikings' bows were useless, their strings having been thoroughly soaked. Powerless against the onslaught of the arrows, they waited with no defense until Sigurd bravely shielded Freya, protecting her from harm. Suddenly, a horde of men clad in woolen tunics, some even wearing armor, wielding spears and axes, rushed out of the forest with a menacing war cry. The attackers charged, and Sigurd gave the signal. The attackers crumbled as the heavy Jomsborg spears ripped through them, sending 6 to the ground. But just as they were dealing with the onslaught, a war horn echoed in the background. A voice bellowed in Norse, "For the cross! Charge, men!" A group of steel-clad men swept through the woods, forcing the others to flee in a mad dash. As the group disappeared into the forest, a man approached the stranded Vikings. Even though Sigurd stood tall, he was surprised to see this man tower head and shoulders above him. He was broad and frank, with blue piercing eyes and red hair that flowed over his golden armor. He draped himself in a blue cloak, wearing a gold helm and a gold-linked byrnie. His shield bore a massive red cross. The man locked eyes with Sigurd and asked, "Are you Christian men?" "Yes, we are," replied Sigurd, delighted. "Where are we? Who are you? The one who rescued us so opportunistically." "You're on the coast of Ireland, a mere 3 miles from my city of Dublin. The Irish wouldn't have dared to come so close if they hadn't thought I was cruising somewhere else. I am Thorstein, son of King Tryggva of Norway." The Vikings gazed in wonder at the handsome chief. Old Bjorn blasted his war horn, and the Vikings cheered, "Skål to King Thorstein! Skål!" Chapter 9. How Freya fared forth. "Thanks, friends," smiled Thorstein, and Sigurd was in awe of the handsome and regal man standing before him. "Who are you, young sir? And who are these men? Truly I have seldom seen such a fine group of warriors, wounded as they may be." "I am Sigurd Buisson of Bornholm, king, and with me is Freyja of Vendland, niece of Gunhild of Denmark. This is Ulf Ringsson, captain of our ship, and as for my men, they are the last of the Vikings." "What?" Thorstein exclaimed in amazement, throwing down his weapons. "Tell me your tale, quickly. I heard of Harald's accession feast, but nothing of what followed. Has Sigvald won Norway?" Sigurd recounted the battle at Hildirun Bay, and Thorstein's face grew dark. As they continued on their journey to Dublin, Thorstein told them of his own adventures. He had fled to Russia after his father's murder, became a wandering Viking, and was later baptized. He had then come to Ireland and won the kingdom of Dublin, ruling alongside his brother-in-law, Thorstein Kvaran. "We spotted your ship from the castle," he explained, "so I came out to aid any who might escape. Now, what do you intend to do?" "As for that," replied Sigurd, "I don't care much, but Lady Freya here must be returned home." "Then will you be my man?" inquired Thorstein. "That I will," Sigurd exclaimed, turning to his men. "Listen, Vikings. What say you to taking service with King Thorstein?" "Aye," the men roared, clashing their arms, and Thorstein smiled. "That pleases me well, Sigurd, for a few Jomsborg men are worth 100 others. As for Freya, she must take her chances. It is too late in the season for ships now, and I fear she must remain with us until spring. However, that can wait. There is the city." As they crested a hill, Dublin came into view, and the Vikings marvelled at its beauty, a town with towering walls and strong fortifications unlike any they had seen before. They rode through the streets and were quartered in the palace, where Thorstein assigned rooms for Ulf, Sigurd, and Freya. Fresh new garments were sent to all, and they joyfully reconvened at the great hall for the midday meal. There, Thorstein introduced his visitors to Queen Gyda, his brother-in-law, and other important members of his court. They quickly became engrossed in conversation, forgetting their previous hardships. After the meal, Sigurd led his Jomsborg men into the hall and knelt before Thorstein's high seat. He vowed to obey and serve the king, with the others following suit. Thorstein then bestowed each man with a shield adorned with a large red cross. However, Sigurd received a stunning golden helmet boasting a dragon in the same precious metal, with outstretched wings. "I won this helm in Russia," Thorstein grinned. "So may the dragon always face my enemies." Sigurd was thrilled with the gift worthy of a king, and expressed his gratitude to Thorstein. The following day he was appointed to serve in the courtmen or bodyguard, and began his new duties. A week later the first snowfall arrived, yet Freya was not dismayed, since she had given up hope of returning home before the spring. Thorstein's court was a pleasant place, and both she and Sigurd thoroughly enjoyed themselves. Queen Gyda grew fond of Freya, who had a cheerful demeanour and a joyous heart. Sigurd's wound soon healed, and by Yuletide both had adapted to their new environment. Sigurd became quite attached to King Thorstein, who was high-tempered yet just. In warlike exercises, no one could match him. He would often stroll down to the harbour, have his men row out a warship, and then walk along the oars as a challenge. To top it off, he would sometimes juggle knives or balls, never losing his balance. Thorstein was very interested in Sigurd, whose nickname Fair Hair had followed him from Jomsborg. The king contributed to Sigurd's repertoire of sword tricks learned in school. As Yuletide came to a close, a ship sailed into the bay, a rare sight since ships usually did not voyage during winter. The visitors aboard were traders from Norway, causing the court to be filled with astonishment. One evening, as Ulf sat eating his meal, he suddenly leapt to his feet. "Who was that man that just walked past the door?" he exclaimed. The king shot a swift, keen look at the captain before replying, "That is Thorir Clacka, who arrived today from Norway with his brother Thorkel, bearing news and goods for trading." Ulf warned, "Then beware of him, Thorstein, for I have often seen him in deep conversation with Halldor Ragnvald. He is here for no good, I think." Shortly after, Thorir and Thorkel entered. Both were short, dark, and well-dressed, but their eyes constantly roved beneath their low brows. Thorkel's face, in particular, was powerful, yet sullen. Thorir started slightly at the sight of Sigurd, but Thorstein greeted him kindly, and he sat down silently, falling into low conversation with his brother. For several days, nothing occurred, except for Thorir's frequent audiences with Thorstein. But at every meal, Sigurd noted Thorkel's gaze fixed on himself or Freya, although it dropped before that of Sigurd. This puzzled him, for he could not see why Thorkel should be interested, and it also angered him, for he saw plainly that Freya did not like it. A week or two after the arrival of the Norsemen, Thorstein and Sigurd were talking together while Freya and the queen were busy with their sewing. Suddenly the king exclaimed, "Sigurd, how would you like to visit Norway next summer?" The boy started, meeting the king's eye eagerly. "Nothing better, my lord." Thorstein smiled. "Well, Thorir urges me to take the realm of Norway from Ragnvald, as is my right. He says that the Bonders are not satisfied with Halldor's rule, and that it would be an easy task to overthrow him. What think you?" "Well," responded Sigurd, "if Halldor Ragnvald could overthrow the might of Jomsborg, I think it would go hard with others who attempt his kingdom." Freya, who had been listening earnestly, broke in. "Perhaps, King Thorstein, Ragnvald might have sent this man to bring you into his power." Thorstein stared at Freya for a moment. Then his blue eyes lit up with a fierce light, and his fist came down on the table. "As I am a Christian man, that is it. Beware, Thorir Clacka. If I go to Norway, it will not be as your master expects." "The manly Ragnvald controls a strong force of 16 jarls," said the queen, her eyes glinting with speculation. "But not all of them will remain loyal for long. If each jarl governs one of the kingdom's districts, perhaps you may find an opening that way, Thorstein." The king nodded, his expression resolute. "Regardless, I will need a formidable force. Once I rule Norway, I swear upon my sword that I will uproot paganism from the land and bring it under the cross of the White Christ. The hammer of Thor will disappear from this land." For a moment, the king's handsome face hardened with determination. Then, as he rose to bid Sigurd good night, his expression softened again. A few days later, Sigurd felt Thorkel's gaze becoming increasingly intolerable. The boy decided to warn the man to stop staring at Freya so insolently. As he passed through the narrow, dimly lit streets on his watch, 3 men leaped out from a doorway, catching him off guard. Despite being outnumbered, Sigurd stood his ground, drawing his sword and using a nearby wall to shield himself. The men attacked him one by one, their blows shattering his lightweight shield. But Sigurd's men were nearby, and he called out their battle cry. The attackers redoubled their efforts. One of them struck Sigurd's shield with enough force to shatter it, but Sigurd's sword landed a fatal blow on the second man's shoulder. The third man's sword, however, dealt a grievous wound to Sigurd, causing him to stumble and fall over the body of the man he'd killed. At that moment, torches lit up the lane, and a loud shout caused the assassins to flee. The attackers shouted in anger as they saw Sigurd lying in the street, but they had already fled. Bjorn, one of Sigurd's men, picked him up off the ground. Thanks to the gift of Thorstein, Sigurd emerged from the skirmish unscathed. Nevertheless, there was a noticeable dent in his helmet from the force of the blow. Bjorn rifled through the possessions of the slain man, and his companions let out a cry of recognition. "He is one of Thorir Clacka's crew! To the king!" "Stop!" called out Sigurd, his voice echoing through the night. "Let us wait till dawn. They won't be able to escape, and the king won't appreciate being awakened from his slumber." Although it was a reluctant decision, the Vikings agreed, and Sigurd took his post once more. However, the night was far from over. 2 hours past midnight, a guard from the harbour raced up to Sigurd, sounding the alarm. "Sigurd, Thorir Clacka's ship is leaving and they aren't responding to our signals. Hurry!" Sigurd called to Bjorn, and together they raced down to the harbour. The ship, a trading vessel, could be seen slowly making its way to the harbour's entrance. Without hesitation, Sigurd hopped into a light skiff moored by the edge of ice. A dozen men rowed with all their might to catch up to the fleeing ship. "Easy now, men," Sigurd commanded as they closed in on the vessel. "Why are you leaving Dublin? Return and make your case." But the ship only replied with a mocking voice. "What business is it of yours, young rooster? Go back to Jomsborg and—" "Help, Sigurd! Help!" A cry interrupted, but silence quickly followed. Something splashed into the water beside Sigurd's boat, and Bjorn retrieved it. "That was Freya's voice! Get closer!" Despite their efforts, only a mocking laugh answered as the ship hoisted its square sail and vanished into the night. "It's no use," Bjorn sighed. "We should turn back. Look, I found this." Bjorn held out a piece of wood with something scratched onto it. Sigurd and Freya were the only ones who knew the secret of runic writing, known exclusively among the priests and high-ranking chieftains of the Northmen. As they approached the landing, Sigurd was filled with a terrible dread. "Quickly now, we must hurry!" he shouted, urging his men on. As they drew ashore, Sigurd held the piece of wood up to a torch to get a better look. The inscription was too faint to read in the dim light. Chapter 10. Farewell to Dublin. Bjorn and his band of Vikings huddled around, their faces etched with confusion as Bjorn struggled to make sense of the markings. None of them could read runic, it being more of a shorthand than anything else. A cry of dismay rang out from Sigurd. "Listen, men!" he bellowed. "Thorkel bears me to England. Rescue Sigurd! Come, men, to the palace!" The Vikings echoed his words, their Jomsborg battle yell piercing the slumbering town and reaching up to the castle. "Bring Thorir Clacka, but harm him not," commanded Sigurd, "while I arouse the king." But Thorstein, the king, was already awake. He had been roused by the loud clamouring outside. Sword in hand, he made his way to the great hall just as Sigurd charged in at the other end. "What's going on?" bellowed Thorstein, his eyes wild with anger. "Justice and vengeance, king," panted Sigurd, handing Thorstein the piece of wood. Thorstein took it, and by the light of the torches read the message. "What does it mean?" he asked. "Freyja of Vendland has been kidnapped, Thorstein, and I was attacked by 3 men in the streets. I killed one of them, and he was a man of Thorir Clacka's stay. Here is Thorir now." Bjorn and 2 Vikings stormed in, dragging a trembling Thorir. Thorstein quickly grasped the situation and confronted him. "What does this night's work mean? Where's your brother?" he demanded. Thorir stammered, "I don't know, my lord. Is he not in his rooms?" Then, with a hint of boldness creeping in, he added, "Am I accountable for Thorkel's doings, Thorstein? What do you mean?" Thorstein locked eyes with the man, and Thorir squirmed under his scrutinizing gaze but did not back down. "Go to your rooms," Thorstein spat, dismissing him with contempt. He then turned to Sigurd. "Now tell me the full story." Sigurd recounted the attack and the ship's escape, as well as Freya's cry. "I sent men to her rooms," he finished. "Here they come now." As if on cue, the men entered, followed by Queen Gyda and some of her ladies. Gyda had learned of the tumult from the Vikings, and explained how a messenger had lured Freya out of her chambers an hour before, claiming that Sigurd was gravely injured in a fight. "Come with me, quickly," Thorstein ordered Sigurd, and they made their way to the castle ramparts. The sun was just starting to rise, and all they could see on the horizon was a small white speck out at sea. "The proof against Thorir may not exist yet, so we shall deal with him later," declared the king. "But that man over there has brought shame upon me, and he shall be executed. Fairhair, select men from my court and gather the fastest longship in the harbour, the Crane. Thorkel has already commandeered his brother's ship, so you will soon catch up to him. The Crane is already supplied with everything you need, so hurry and depart within the hour." "Thank you, Thorstein," replied Sigurd. "I was just about to ask you for this favour. I will bring along my own men and 30 of yours. Thank you for your kindness, and most of all for your friendship, Thorstein." The king smiled sorrowfully. "I have few acquaintances, Sigurd, and you, though new, are most loyal. Go with safety and don't forget about me, for it's still storm season." Just as Sigurd walked away, the king stopped him by a sudden impulse. "Wait, give me your hands." Sigurd, bewildered, held out his hands for Thorstein to take. "Now swear to me again, Haldor Sigurd." Overwhelmed by this unforeseen honour, Sigurd tripped over his oath and welled up with tears. "I don't need an oath to promise allegiance, King Thorstein. When you have seized Norway, being friends with you is all I desire." Tears came to Thorstein's eyes as well. He unbuckled his sword belt, throwing it over Sigurd's shoulders. "I may not have any earls yet, but here is my Haldor gift, my friend. Goodbye." Sigurd shook the king's hand and hurriedly left, commanding his men and selecting 30 of Thorstein's men. He sent them down to the Crane with Bjorn, and followed them shortly after, bidding Ulf farewell. The captain would have joined Sigurd, but Thorstein had ordered him to convey a message to an Irish king further inland. As Thorstein had said, the Crane was fully equipped for their journey, and they set sail with the wind. As they left the harbour, Sigurd informed his men about his promotion, and it brought about a cheer from his followers. The Jomsvikings were proud to have such a gallant leader. Even though the title carried no land, every chief of noble birth aspired to become a Haldor or earl, for the jarls were second only to the king. With the wind light, the oars were run out, and the Crane sailed southward under full speed. Thorkel's ship was out of sight, but Sigurd knew his destination and was confident of overtaking the other ship before nightfall. "Old Bjorn, why do you think Thorkel is heading for England instead of Norway?" Sigurd asked. The elder paused for a moment before answering. "Well, Haldor Sigurd, I believe Thorkel is a cunning man. If he took Freya to Norway, he would gain nothing, but by taking her to England he can profit much. King Bjorn Wolfe would pay a high price for a hostage from King Harold of Denmark." "I see. Then she will not be harmed?" Sigurd inquired. "Of course not, Haldor. At least, not until she reaches England, which may never come to pass. Bjorn Wolfe is as treacherous as Ragnvald himself, and if Freya falls into his hands, it would be bad business for her." They did not catch up with Thorkel's ship as soon as Sigurd expected. Only in the mid-afternoon did the helmsman shout while Sigurd ran to the forecastle and saw a small white speck far ahead. "Lower the sail and get out all the oars," Sigurd ordered. "We cannot catch up with them today, so it's best to let Thorkel think he is safe." The Crane sailed under her oars until nightfall, when the sail was hoisted and the oars were taken down. The wind freshened toward midnight when Sigurd handed the watch over to Bjorn. At dawn, Bjorn woke Sigurd up. "Come, Haldor, a squall from the west has hit us, and it's daybreak," Bjorn said. Sigurd followed him to the deck and saw the reefed sail and Crane running before a squall of wind and driving snow. There was nothing to do but wait until sunrise. As the full day broke with heavy snow flurries, a shout went up. Not half a mile away, Thorkel's ship also ran before the wind. "Men, shake out the reefs. We may as well take our chances and ensure we get her," Sigurd commanded. Bjorn halted Sigurd and pointed to a dreary grey line on the horizon. "England, or Wales, rather, Haldor. It would be fruitless to take Thorkel's vessel in these turbulent waters. Our ships would shatter like kindling wood." Sigurd begrudgingly conceded, and trailed Thorkel's ship as the Welsh coast grew more prominent in the distance. The sky cleared, yet the sea remained rough, precluding any attempts to board. "I recognize this place, Haldor," the helmsman hollered. "Remember that great headland, Bjorn?" "Aye," Bjorn replied. "Observe how the coast slopes there, Sigurd. That's Wales, where my kinsfolk reside. We are entering a vast inlet that stretches deep within the land, and to the right is the Saxon kingdom of Wessex. 6 years ago we voyaged there and pillaged a town they call Bristol. It seems that Thorkel intends to make a landing along the Saxon shores." Sigurd was transfixed by the towering cliffs until Thorkel veered his vessel to the east. Sigurd noted that they were, in fact, within a massive inlet. The crane stayed within a distance of the fleeing ship, but did not draw any closer. "Where do you suppose they'll transport Lady Freyja if they succeed in landing?" Sigurd wondered aloud. "To King Bjorn Wolfe's castle in London, no doubt," Bjorn replied, "although there's no hope of them escaping our pursuit." "Prepare yourselves, men," Sigurd commanded soon after. "The seas are settling, and we will engage them now." Thorkel, too, observed the shift in tide and made a swift turn toward the shore, rowing with great haste. The two ships, only a few hundred meters apart, skirted along the low-lying shoreline. But then Bjorn let out a howl of fury. "He'll slip away yet!" Thorkel's ship, just beyond the craggy headland, had turned in toward the coast. The crane altered their course, dropped their sail, and with all oars at full throttle rushed forward. Before them, they saw Thorkel's vessel and his crew sprinting out. Meanwhile, an armed band from the town above raced to meet Thorkel. Sigurd didn't waste any time waiting to see what would happen next. Instead, he leapt overboard from the crane as it scraped against the sand and ice. Bjorn followed suit and waded ashore with him. While they were among Thorkel's party, Sigurd spotted the flutter of a dress and knew that there was little point in searching the other ship, so he dashed up the hill with haste. Suddenly a barrage of arrows rained down upon Sigurd and his men. The cry of "Death to the sea-wolves!" echoed through the air. Sigurd, Bjorn, and one other man were far ahead of their group, sprinting as fast as they could. But as the trap was sprung, a group of Saxons appeared out of nowhere and surrounded them. Chapter 11. At Bjorn Wolfe's Court. Sigurd sheathed his sword with a decisive flick of his wrist. The Saxon horde hesitated, unsure of what to do next. One of their bravest stepped forward. "You'll find little plunder here, Vikings, only hard knocks. You had best put to sea again," he taunted. "We are no Vikings or sea-wolves," retorted Sigurd. "I am Haldor Sigurd Buisson, one of King Thorstein's warriors from Dublin, and I am in hot pursuit of these men who fled up to the town. 2 days ago they abducted a noble lady from Thorstein's very own castle, and I seek to rescue her." The Saxon leader gasped in astonishment, while Sigurd's company soon caught up with him. The Saxons raised their bows in a menacing manner, but the leader gestured for them to stand down. "You look rather young to be a Haldor," the leader mused out loud. "But if your story is true, then we have indeed done wrong. The leader of the other party said he was pursued by sea robbers and was on his way to King Bjorn Wolfe. So, although he was Northman, I gave him safe conduct. What proof have you for your tale?" Sigurd's heart sank at this unexpected development, but he knew he had to win the Saxon over if he wanted any chance at retrieving the abducted woman. "Does my ship look like a Viking dragon?" Sigurd stated confidently. "If we were Vikings, we wouldn't be abroad at this time of year. Look, I wear the cross, and my men are from Thorstein's courtmen. You can see that from their shields and weapons. We are all Christians and no followers of Thor." The Saxon leader came forward and shook Sigurd's hand heartily. "I beg your pardon, Haldor. I am the warden of the coast, and I must do my utmost to defend it from sea rovers. My name is Haldor Edmund, and now I recall that there was a woman, or rather, a girl among the other party." "She's a noble lady from Denmark," Sigurd clarified, not wanting to reveal anything about the woman's true identity. "Now, can't we follow these men to the town?" Haldor Edmund paused to consider the request. "Of course, but they told us they were on the king's business. I sent a man with them to procure horses at once. I'm truly regretful about this whole mess, Haldor." "You did your duty," Sigurd reassured him. "There's nothing to be done now." He looked over to Bjorn. "What's your counsel, old friend?" "We must catch Thorkel," said Bjorn. I suggest you follow him with the Jomsborg men. I will take the others and the ship, and we will proceed to London by sea." Sigurd nodded in agreement, but turned to Edmund, the Saxon, for confirmation. "Can we buy horses in the neighbouring town?" Edmund assured him that they could, and Sigurd quickly selected his trusted Jomsborg men before rushing to the town. They rode hard, but Thorkel had a head start and had taken the best horses, leaving the Jomsborg men with exhausted mounts. As they passed through Malmesbury and Wantage, Sigurd and his men were surprised by the size and civilization of the cities. Wessex and Sussex had gone untouched by the Danes, creating a society far richer and more advanced than anything in the north. Sigurd marvelled at the land's beauty and remarked to his men, "If these Saxons had kings like ours, King Harold would have a hard time indeed before taking the throne of England." When they arrived in Reading, they discovered that Thorkel was only half a day ahead. They pushed on to London with relentless speed, reaching their destination by evening. The next morning, Sigurd arrived at the palace and announced himself to the chamberlain, causing a stir in the great hall. Sigurd had grown into a formidable figure in the past few months, now larger than his age, with golden hair that flowed over his shoulders. He wore a blue cloth kirtle and waist, and was armed with the magnificent sword given to him by Thorstein, with a hilt wound in gold and ivory carvings on the scabbard. The chamberlain led Sigurd to the high seat where King Bjorn Wolfe sat. Sigurd knelt briefly before rising again. The king had a deceitful countenance that made Sigurd nervous. His heart sank when he noticed the mocking face of Thorkel among the courtiers. Once the chamberlain announced Sigurd's name and title, the king stood up. "Greetings, Haldor Sigurd. The men of King Thorstein are always welcome at court. We look forward to Thorstein's return. You seem quite young to hold such a high title under such a great man." Sigurd responded appropriately before making his request. "My lord king, I ask for your aid. Amongst your men I see Thorkel Gormson, a Norseman who recently abducted a lady from King Thorstein's castle. I have followed him closely, and since he is here, Lady Freya can't be far away." King Bjorn Wolfe looked taken aback. "What is this? Thorkel is a peaceful trader, and he just arrived here yesterday. He said nothing about a lady." Sigurd stood his ground. "Regardless, she is with him, and King Thorstein sent me to rescue her. I must ask for your help, King Bjorn Wolfe." The king called Thorkel to stand before him, which he did with a sly smile on his face. Bjorn Wolfe asked him about Sigurd's allegations. "Nothing, my lord. I don't have any woman with me, and I recently arrived on the west coast where I was trading." Bjorn Wolfe looked at Sigurd, and Sigurd knew that he was being made fun of. The king likely held Freya as a hostage. "You must have been mistaken about Thorkel, Haldor Sigurd. He is a kind-hearted man," said the king, his voice full of false kindness. "I can aid you if needed. You and your men can stay in the palace." With Thorkel's mocking smirk and these words, Sigurd lost his temper. He stepped forward and shouted, "There is no mistake, King Bjorn Wolfe, and you know it well. Do not think that you will avoid Thorstein's wrath with fancy talk when he hears of this. As for you, Thorkel," Sigurd's eyes flared as he turned on the man, causing him to cower in fear. "Watch yourself. If I catch you outside the palace, I'll kill you like the mutt that you are." "You've crossed the line, Haldor Sigurd," the king retorted sternly. "I promised to help you with this matter, so bring your men to the palace immediately, and we'll search for the lady." Sigurd returned to his men with a heavy heart. He knew that the king's command meant he and his crew would be closely monitored, with no way to rescue Freya. When he delivered the unpleasant news to the men, they were just as outraged as he was. But there was nothing they could do, and they took up residence in the palace that afternoon. Thorkel made sure to steer clear of Sigurd. The Joms Vikings roamed the city streets freely, marvelling at the shops, while Sigurd instructed them to keep an eye out for Freya. The days passed, and Bjorn Wolfe tried to placate his guests with a pretended search of the city and kind words, but Sigurd eventually decided to take matters into his own hands. By mid-February, he was eager to return to King Thorstein. After dinner, he huddled his men together and declared, "If we're to locate Lady Freya, we must do it ourselves. I suspect she's being held in the palace's women's wing, so mingle in those quarters and act as if you're shopping. I'll do the same, and with any luck Lady Freya might either spot us, or we'll pick up some clues." Sigurd was treated with great fanfare, but whenever he stepped out he sensed that someone was watching him. The next day he visited the shops near the women's quarters of the palace. One of his men approached him as he strolled, saying in a hushed tone, "Come with me, Haldor." Sigurd followed, chattering, and the man led him to the third window from the edge. Sigurd's heart leapt with joy as he spotted a scrap of blue and gold cloth hanging from the corner of the window. It was unmistakably from Freyja's scarf, and he knew they had found her. As he looked up, a face appeared but quickly vanished as he gave a sign of warning. "We have found her, sure enough, and now to rescue her," he exclaimed upon returning to his room. Later that evening, a wild shout erupted from the next room where Sigurd's men were gathered, and Bjorn strode into Sigurd's room, his face partially covered with bandages. "What is this? Wounded, Bjorn?" Sigurd asked, concerned. "We met a Danish ship 4 days ago, Haldor, and she stopped to talk with us." Bjorn explained. "Up to your old tricks, Sea-Wolf. What did you talk about?" Sigurd laughed. "The price of swords, mainly. The Danes finally decided that ours were better, so we gave them Thorkel's old trading ship and brought the Dane with us. She's brand new and as fast as the crane. It was hard work, though, for I had only 30 men, and they were double that. We lost 10 killed, and half of us are wounded, but that is no matter. Now for your story." Sigurd quickly filled Bjorn in on the situation with Freyja. After a moment of silence, Bjorn spoke up. "It is no light matter, Sigurd, to brave Bjorn Wolfe, but I think we had best carry off Lady Freyja. Once aboard the crane, we would be safe. But how to do the business? By craft only, Bjorn. Freyja saw me today and knows we are here. How to get a message to her? That is easy enough. You write it and I will shoot an arrow into her window tonight," Bjorn suggested. "Good. I never thought of that," Sigurd replied, grateful for the idea. He quickly got some parchment and wrote the message. "I told her that tomorrow night we will wait beneath her window. She must contrive to let herself down, and if necessary, we will fight our way down to the crane. Is she below the bridge or above it?" Sigurd asked. "Below. I will go down tomorrow and bid the men be ready to receive us. We must get some fresh water on board too," Bjorn said, already planning their next move. An hour ticked away before Bjorn turned up once again, breaking the silence. "The arrow flew obediently true, Haldor. I lingered a while and witnessed a light flit across her window 3 times, he reported, sounding victorious. Sigurd affirmed this with a grave nod. "Excellent. She comprehends our message. Let us prepare the crane for tomorrow, then, and make certain we are back before dusk. Have a couple of boats at the water stairs near the end of this alleyway." "Rest assured, Haldor," Bjorn replied before quickly making his way back to the vessel.